All right, welcome back to the show. Time to transition back to hockey. This time we bring in Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. Greg, I need you to help me make sense of what's going on in the playoffs in terms of road teams. 34 in 22. Why are road teams getting it done this time in the NHL playoffs? Excuse me.
It's a great question, man. I mean, obviously, one of the first things you hear when you talk to people about their theories about it within the league, they always bring up parity as being the first thing. The idea that the separation between the best team in the playoffs and the quote unquote worst team in the playoffs isn't that much huge, you know. And I thought we saw some series in the first round that certainly reflected that, including some major upsets. But then you just have like the general gist of the Stanley Cup playoffs every year, which is that goaltending is the great equalizer. Underdogs always have less pressure than favorites. I mean, you look at that Panthers-Bruins series, you've got a team that is trying to go wire to wire as the best team in NHL history and also win a last Stanley Cup for their captain and also break the President's Trophy curse against the Florida Panthers team that was a wild card and that didn't play as well as it did last season. So it's always interesting to see also the different dynamics and pressures. And I think that's played a lot into what we've seen with road teams so far this playoff.
Yeah, this Panthers team, they look legit based on going up 2-0 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We've been talking about the Leafs a lot, obviously, being in Toronto. What have you made of the Leafs so far in these playoffs, and how do you expect them to react to going down 2-0 to Florida?
Well, obviously, it was happy for the most part to see them win in the first round over the Lightning. I got tired of the same jokes being made about them over and over again. Although I have to admit, as someone who is not a Leaf loyalist, there certainly was a little bit of part of me that was nostalgic for Toronto playoff failures. You know, when things started to get a little hairy in that series, like I'm like, maybe I would like to see it one more time. But I'm happy they won, and we can move past the whole thing of not winning since 2004. But the problem for them in this series against the Panthers is twofold. One, Florida has really found their game. I mean, the Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett unit was the best line in that Boston series. Now the Barkov line has come in pretty good. They're obviously still getting a lot of scoring out of Montour. So things are starting to trend in a really good direction for the roster as a whole. But the Leafs in this series so far through 2 games are just getting goalied, man. Like Bobrovsky's played his 2 best games of the playoffs in games 1 and 2 of this series. And it's not as if the Leafs aren't getting prime opportunities to score. They're getting more offensive chances on average in the slot and high danger areas in this series than they have in the regular season. It's just that you're seeing Bobrovsky do some really magical things. That save he made on Matthews in game 2, where he threw a flying, forearm into the puck, it seemed like was a hell of a save. And he's been doing that more often than not.
We should talk about William Nylander, please, just for my sake. Is this what he is, Greg? Is just an occasional superstar? In that third period last night, he was incredible. So strong on the puck. Great shot. We know that hit the bar, hit the post, but we see it for maybe 25 minutes a game. Is it what he is? The occasional superstar? He can't keep it on. It's a switch on or switch off scenario with him.
Yeah. Inconsistency, I think, has defined him throughout his career. I never agreed with the people that were like, they should trade him. I always thought that Willie had incredible offensive skills and would be the kind of player ultimately that you're going to end up searching for again if you do let him off your roster. But you have to live with what he is. And what he is when he's on, he could be a dominant force, the guy who wins you a game. And other times it's going to be a little bit more frustrating and the results might not necessarily be there. Obviously, the shot volume seems to always be there for him. But making a difference on the score sheet's a different story.
Greg, looking from the Florida Panthers perspective, this team that won the President's Trophy last year, and then they get rid of their coach and bring in Paul Maurice. I want to focus on Paul Maurice. Just explain the impact he has on this roster and really getting them to be firing on all cylinders when it matters the most, something they couldn't do previously.
Well, the one reason they wanted to make a change from interim coach Andrew Brunette after last postseason was it was pretty obvious that Brunette, as a novice head coach, didn't really know what adjustments to make in the playoffs when adversity hit. He got completely outcoached in that series against the Lightning by John Cooper, as many people have. So I think they wanted to go with somebody who obviously had a bit more experience. In Maurice's case, he left the Winnipeg Jets. It didn't look like he was going to coach again anytime soon. And then this the Florida opportunity and the Vegas Golden Knights opportunity both came up. I've spoken with the Knights, and he was actually their maybe top choice ahead of Bruce Cassidy in the offseason, but it turned out that he wanted to go to Florida instead, and has a wealth of experience, and I think has added a little bit more veteran savvy, a little bit more having been there before behind the bench, that really has helped him in the postseason.
Hey, Greg, off the air, we were talking about, where to put the blame when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs and being in this hole. And it seems like no one ever really talks about Sheldon Keefe. And I feel like I don't have enough knowledge to know what goes into being an NHL coach and plays and lines and whatnot. But in your opinion, how do you think Sheldon Keefe is doing right now?
I mean, I think he's a good coach. I mean, I think he is someone who's, led them obviously to the heights of regular season success. I don't think it's necessarily on him when they've had a lack of postseason success. I think he's fine. The problem for them right now is trying to find ways to get the puck past a hot goalie, and also trying to sort of modulate your game a little bit, because the Florida Panthers offer a different challenge than the Tampa Bay Lightning did. And, it's a team that is very much, an aggressive forward-checking team, a team that has players that they can just deploy and try to shut down your best players. It's a different challenge, and they're just going to have to kind of find their way through not only what the Panthers throw at you 5-on-5, but also obviously trying to find unique ways to try to take away Bobrovsky's eyes and score some goals around the net that they're just not getting in these first couple of games.
Greg, is Sam Bennett dirty, or is he just a gamer that knows how to step it up in these kind of situations?
Everybody's dirty. There's like one player in the league that's not dirty, and it's like Jacob Slavin, the Hurricanes. That's why he wins the Lady Byng every year. No, man, like that was the play on Nyes. I'd love to talk to Bennett. I'm not on the series, obviously. You can see I'm in my humble home right now, but I'd love to talk to Bennett to find out how he viewed that play, where it looked like he was delivering a Dwayne Johnson rock bottom behind the net on Nyes. And unfortunately, Nyes now with the concussion is out for a number of games for the Leafs. Because that play was so bizarre. Like I'd love to know what Bennett's take on that play was. But when it comes to the cross-checking, obviously he was fined by the NHL for it. And, you could have argued that might have been a game right there for where the stick was on that cross-check. He plays over the line, like at times, as a number of guys on that team do. But it's just a matter of whether or not the NHL feels like it goes so far over the line that it deserves a suspension. And apparently they didn't think it did.
Now, with Matthew Nyes potentially being out for the rest of the series, the impact he's had in the playoffs has been really impressive. A guy who's only played 4 regular season games, has been on the ice for a lot of big goals. What does him now not being in the lineup mean for the Maple Leafs going forward down to 2 must-win games in Florida?
Well, again, it means that falls onto other players to create some offense. I mean, the thing with Nyes was like he was dangerous in the offensive zone so often. It wasn't obviously gets that incredible goal in game 1, but I mean, he had tried to create so much in other spots that now it just falls onto someone else to try to pick up that slack. It's a shame, like you said, to have somebody who was playing with such excitement and electricity and really kind of seizing the moment as a rookie to all of a sudden suffer an injury like that, because it really was fun to see him play. And it really does validate how their general manager, Kyle Dubas, wanted to hold on to Nyes so tightly at the trade deadline when others were like, throw him in a trade to get what you need. And Dubas is like, he's untouchable. And now we can see why.
Let's talk about the Kraken a little bit, because that's just a fantastic story for me based on what they're doing. And one Philip Grubauer, who I feel like he's the type of goaltender who can goalie other teams and potentially steal a playoff series for the Seattle Kraken, like he kind of did against Colorado. Do you believe that they have a legitimate shot of getting past Dallas here?
They do, but not necessarily on the shoulders of Grubauer. I think I still find him to be a little inconsistent. He had a great series against Colorado. He was pretty strong in game 1 against Dallas. But he's not going to be the reason they win the series. The reason they win the series, if they do, is because their depth is so good. It's one of those deals where like we looked at the Kraken and we're like, oh, they made the playoffs in year 2. How cute. The little puppy is jumping up and biting our leg, But it turns out that like they have a bunch of old guys in that team that all have, a lot of them have Stanley Cup rings. A lot of them have, multiple seasons of postseason runs. And so it's going to be on the Gords and the Schwartzes and the Alexiaks and Schultz and players that have been through this grind before to kind of point them in the right direction, keep them honest, and make sure that they don't get overwhelmed by the moment, and win with depth. I mean, again, Dallas is a deep team. I think they match up well with Seattle, but at the end of the day, like, Seattle does get contributions throughout their entire lineup, and it's going to be much more about that and also trying to win these grinding games with the players that they have on the roster than I think Grubauer stealing anything in this series.
I think when Seattle first came in, everybody kind of expected, oh, how are they going to build their team? Is it going to be similar to Vegas? And will they have the same success as Vegas had? They didn't last year, but you're seeing them this year. Just explain how Ron Francis and Dave Haxtell were able to build this roster in such a way where, like you mentioned, they have no true superstar, just a bunch of depth guys and a bunch of really strong pieces put together, playing under the right system.
Your verbal gaffe was great, because there was always a theory that Ron Hextall hired Dave Haxtell in Philadelphia because they had almost the same name. That was always the pet theory amongst Flyers fans, especially after Haxtell got fired. So, they play a very aggressive style. They're great on the forecheck. They really grind. They come at you in waves. They're smart. The problem for them last season was purely goaltending. Like, you look inside their numbers last year, and as a first-year team, they did some things that were really good. And what was happening to them last season a lot was they'd score a goal, and then their porous goaltending, whether it was Grubauer or whomever, would give the goal right back. And they weren't having that happen a lot this season. Martin Jones gave him a few really good months before he fell apart. Grubauer's numbers weren't good, but they've obviously in the playoffs trended in the right direction. So they've always, in 2 years, they've kind of developed an identity of being a team that's very tough to play against and a team that gets goals from a number of different places in the lineup. They just needed to kind of get some puck stopped, and they've gotten that obviously in the first round and in the first 2 games of this series for the most part.
Greg, we're running short on time here, but before I let you go, I have to ask you, based on what you've seen so far, who do you like to go all the way?
I picked Edmonton before the season. I'm going to stick with that. I mean, I've been saying, man, you throw 2 generational talents on the same roster, at some point they're going to figure it out. They are going to obviously have to score their way out of any problem. They don't quite know how to defend in this league, but if there's any 2 players to be able to do it, it's McDavid and Draisaitl. And I just think that this could be the year, based on how things are sort of shaping up in the West and based on how things sort of are shaping up in the East, that they could see their way through and finally win the Cup.
Yeah, Draisaitl scoring 4 goals always helps, but it's crazy. He scores 4 goals.
Didn't help last time,
and they lose. Yeah, exactly. Pavelski scores 4, the Stars lose. It's a weird league, and it's a weird playoffs right now, but fantastic. Greg, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care.